Hello, everyone. I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes for everyone to join us. I think we've got 35 people and counting. Okay, well, so we've got 40 people with us, so I think I'm going to make a start, and hopefully the people that are still trickling in will kind of get to join us for the main bulk of the session. So hello, everyone. My name is Ruby Stringer. If you came to the last couple of webinars, you might remember me. I'm the director in charge of events for the TPS. We were hoping our chair, Ben, might be able to chair today, but he is otherwise disposed. So you've got me instead. So I just wanted to do a really quick introduction to the Transport Planning Society and Transport Planning Day, which is coming up next week, and then we'll get into the webinar itself. So TPS, Transport Planning Society, hopefully lots of you are already members. Obviously, our mission is to facilitate, develop and promote best practice and innovation in transport planning, and we are the main membership organisation for transport planners specifically. We focus on various different things. We have structured transport planning training programs, including PDS, and kind of we work with CIHT to develop the TPP program. We're engaged in all sorts of national and regional level policy discussions. We kind of work really closely with our core membership, including stakeholder members who we're very grateful to. And yeah, we also try to kind of improve the public understanding and image of transport planning. So yeah, wherever you're joining us from today, we're very happy to have you. Today is actually a pre-Transport Planning Day webinar, a kind of extra one. Transport Planning Day is our annual event. This year it's on the 13th of November, which is next Monday at the Institution of Civil Engineers in London. If you would like to join us, there are still lots of tickets for joining either in person or online, and we'd love to see you there. We are, oops, I've left in the title of the event from the last one, but sorry about that. The theme for this year's Transport Planning Day is all around planning and delivering for a rapid and equitable transition to a decarbonised transport system. And that is what we're looking at today, along with one of our sponsors for Transport Planning Day, Heuristics. So yeah, check out Transport Planning Day. We'd love to see you there. It would be great to have some people join us. So with that, I'll introduce the kind of concept for the session today. So as I say, we've got the team from Heuristics here with us today. They're going to introduce us to their kind of transport planning game, which is such an exciting concept and something that I think is a little bit out of the box compared to what we would normally look at. So we've got Mike Colchin, Andy Boston, and Claire Sheffield, all from the Heuristics team that are going to kind of introduce that to us. Then following that, we're going to have a couple of presentations. So Annette Smith from MOTS is going to do a presentation for us on the kind of equitable and rapid transition to a net zero transport system. Sorry. And then Claire Sheffield is also going to do a presentation along similar lines. And then we're all going to get back together and do a Q&A at the end with questions from all of you. So drop any questions or comments in the chat box or in the Q&A as we go through. But with that, I think I'm going to pass over to Mike to get the session started. So Mike is the co-founder of Heuristic, and through his own innovation consultancy business Cultivate, he also works with organizations and individuals delivering innovative low carbon energy solutions, so not just transport. Prior to this, he worked as partnership manager for the Energy Technologies Institute, and by trade, he's a mechanical engineer with over 30 years experience in transport and energy. So Mike, I'm going to pass over to you.
Thanks, Ruby, and thanks for that introduction, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. just to sort of give you a little bit of background to the three of us. So Andy and I spent quite a lot of our careers working together in Powergen and then E.ON. And it was after that we first developed the first of our workshops as part of Heuristics, which was a workshop that's focused on how the electricity system works. It's called Power Trader. And I happen to be, as some of the other work I do, Claire and I were involved in a research centre called Demand that was based up at Lancaster, looking at the way that the demand for energy is established by not only what happens with electricity, but also what happens with heat, and indeed what happens with transport. And that was so at the time Claire was with Transport for London, and we were at an event for that, and we were chatting, and I was telling her about the workshop, and she said, "Oh, that would be brilliant if you could do something, if we could do something similar for transport planners." And there started a journey. In a few moments, we'll show a video of where we got to on that journey, which sort of ended with COVID, because we developed something that was sort of very physical and needed to bring people together. And then COVID happened, and we're in the stage now where now COVID's all over and people can get back together again. We're trying to bring people together to use this tool with us, but we'll tell you a bit more about that later on. The first thing we wanted to do today, though, was to engage with you a bit interactively using Slido. And I'm just going to share my screen now so you can see the Slido link that we're going to use. And we're going to put on the screen a sort of series of questions. In the chat, you will see the code that you can use for connecting to Slido. And you can also use the QR code on the screen with your phone. That will take you through to the Slido app, which will allow you to answer these questions. We've got 3 questions we're gonna take you through, and these are really about gauging your views for the challenges that are around decarbonising the transport system, to identify some of the issues that we can then discuss in the panel discussion later on, following on from the presentations. So hopefully people are able to access that. Yeah, I can see people starting to respond. So we'll just give people a couple of minutes. And maybe ask any of the panel to comment on the responses we're getting here. Claire, what do you think? Where are you sort of expecting this to end up, this first question?
Oh, that's an interesting question, because all of them are really, really important. I think the most important for achieving transport decarbonisation arguably is achieving buy-in from the travelling public. I think that's where I would sit. It's vital that it's delivered in a way that's equitable, and it's also vital that we put the infrastructure in that's needed. But I think unless we take the public with us on this journey, many of the policy interventions that we're going to need simply won't happen, and the changes that we need to be made won't be made. So that's where I would plonk myself. Okay. I shall go and vote now.
Annette, would you be happy to respond on this at the minute, where you think things are? Do you agree with Claire?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I do. I probably shouldn't, but I've put in my response. Yeah, and I've put in achieving buy-in from the travelling public as well. I think we're just facing such a I don't know, a polarization of views. Maybe it's not a polarization of views, but certainly the media picks up on the polarization of views, which isn't helping us. And so anything that we can do to achieve that buy-in, anything that we know that works, and it would be great to hear from people later about things that they know have worked in their work. I think we need to be sharing that knowledge together, and then that helps us to do this rapid transport decarbonisation and equitable piece that we know we need to do.
Right, brilliant. Thanks, Annette. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So this is going to create a word cloud. In one word, well, you can have 2 or 3. Can you identify what your biggest transport decarbonisation challenge is? What are you personally experiencing in terms of this challenge of actually achieving decarbonisation within the transport system? Mhm. Cost and finance are coming out very strongly there. If you agree with one of the other words, please do type that word again, because it will just bring it to the fore for us. But lots of interesting stuff there around modal shift and behaviours, I think. No, Claire, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think that is really crucial. I think that we all know that we're not going to achieve our decarbonisation goals, and we're certainly not going to achieve them at the speed that we need to, just through relying on technology change. So we have to deliver behaviour change, and what we know is that delivering behaviour change is really, really hard on any kind of scale, and especially outside of our biggest urban centres. So yeah, I really agree with that one. And then I think the challenge around getting the political will to do those measures that's needed and the money to put them in place. I think that sums it up for me, actually, that picture that we've got in front of us now.
Okay. Ruby,
At least we know what the problem is.
Ruby, would you like to comment from a TPS perspective?
Oh, I don't know if I have a good enough kind of overarching view of the TPS, but I think the kind of political will is a huge issue, and kind of I think that at the moment we're in a really interesting interaction between political will and kind of public acceptability, and the way that that kind of is all wrapped up in behavior change as well. So I feel, to me at least, I don't know if I can speak on behalf of the whole TPS, but to me that feels like the biggest challenge, really.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Well, we'll go on and explore that in a second. Annette, I see you just turned your camera on. Did you want to say something?
I just think, sometimes these word clouds, it's interesting, the things that don't come out prominently but are really important, isn't it? So I liked that getting about without a car in a rural area. It's actually, we need to be planning for everybody, and lots of people don't live in cities, and so how do we address that challenge? I think it's really significant.
Which I think is really important when you start to look at the theme for Transport Planning Day, that whole question of equity, which I know we're going to come back to later in the session today. So yeah, great, thank you. Okay, so let's move on to the final question that we have then. And really going back to that political will area, what is needed to persuade decision makers of the value of decarbonising transport? And decision makers, we've been deliberately vague by when we say decision makers, because I think that they will mean different things to different people. But who is it that's making the decisions that you're trying to influence, and what is it that's going to be needed to persuade them to do something different? Andy, you and I discussed these items long and hard. Any thoughts from you on what's coming up on the screen here?
Yeah, I was interested to see if the ones that I put on there that weren't originally on the list were going to feature, and they're coming up. Things like delivering against other priorities. Because this is if you're a politician and it doesn't really deliver against something which is more important to you than transport decarbonisation, then it might not happen. And the one at the bottom as well was with politicians in mind. If the impacts are not going to be if you're not going to get recognition for it, it might not happen. So yeah, they're at the bottom, but there's some votes going for them.
I mean, I guess we drew those conclusions out from our experience of being more involved in the broader, wider energy system, and particularly our background in the electricity sector. It's interesting though, seeing that public pressure is coming out as the highest category here, and I think that's actually been true in the sector we're both so familiar with as well, hasn't it?
It has. I guess public pressure drives some of these other things that we've got on the list, hasn't it? So it becomes a priority if there's a lot of public pressure. So maybe it covers, you know, some of the boxes below as well.
Yeah. Claire, do you want to comment?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think I felt that was like the most powerful one that drove the others, because you'll only get national policy, you'll only get political will if they feel like the public needs it. And at the moment, we have the challenge that actually, if you look at opinion polling on this topic, there is quite a lot of public support. There's a lot of public anxiety about climate change. You know, people are increasingly worried about it, what it will mean for them. And there is quite a lot of public support for action in general, possibly not for the specific actions that you might actually need to do. But the kind of lobby groups in opposition are proving much more effective. You know, they're getting much more media attention and their voices are much louder. So it's also that difference between public opinion and public pressure that's really important here.
Is this also true in the private sector? And I suppose I'm sort of targeting this question to both you and Annette, Claire, because there are definitely decision makers in the private sector who are making decisions about where to put their investments, where to drive things, where they're going to try and lead the market or respond to a market. What is it that drives those decision makers? What is it that influences them? Is public pressure equally important there?
Certainly the private sector clients that we work with at Arup are really concerned about, I mean, obviously a lot of them have got corporate social responsibility goals that they're trying to meet. They're concerned about, and obviously they're concerned about their, you know, commercial performance, but it's their commercial performance in the world that will exist. So they are absolutely concerned about being, you know, being resilient and their business remaining appropriate for the world that we live in. So yeah, there's a lot of concern there. And I think what they're really calling for is clarity and certainty and a framework in which to operate and to make those planning decisions. So, you know, and so that it creates that level playing field. You've got a lot of organizations who want to innovate, but are finding it difficult to do so within a commercial environment. And partly that is because their customers, even their shareholders, are pushing them to do that. So yeah, I think you absolutely are seeing that. And so it's about kind of the government creating an environment in which they are able to do that. I mean, realistically, public pressure is most directly impactful on the public sector and on politicians, but it still has that influence, and there is still that kind of drive towards net zero that we're seeing.
Is that
Annette, I'm sure you're finding the same thing.
Annette, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think you will have organizations in the private sector who are going to lead the way on this, and I think that's really important that you have these organizations that can then show the way for other organizations to follow behind. So, you know, I think that consistency and that framework that Claire talked about is really important, and that political support. So yeah, definitely seeing that there are some organizations that are more prepared to lead than others, though.
Okay, great, thanks so much. Okay, so moving on to the next sort of item on the agenda for today. Andy, Claire and I have put together a video to showcase the tool that we developed that we mentioned earlier on. And we developed this to explore these issues. And we've done it deliberately with a range of audiences in mind. In the video, we've deliberately gone for homemade production values, because what we wanted to get across here is that it is important for us, the three of us, to have conversations with people, be they transport planners, academics, or the general public, and that those conversations happen in an accessible way. Earlier this year, we used the tool that we're going to show you now with Sarah Sharples and her team at the Department for Transport. They were very positive about the experience of working with us, and we have also drawn on the conversations we had with them in the creation of this video. What we have here is a model of a city with a city centre and 2 suburbs. The suburbs are connected to the city centre by these transport corridors. In each of the suburbs are thousands of people. Each one of these characters represents 1,000 people, and those people wish to travel into the city each day during rush hour.
So let's see how they're going to do that. They're going to jump in their cars, that's their preferred mode of transport. And that will get a couple of thousand in, and we can get another couple of thousand on the bike there, or on these buses which are integrated in with the traffic. One of the things they can do is remove these parked cars which have been blocking the road, and other restrictions like poor traffic lights or junctions or whatever, and that's going to allow them to get some more cars on this road.
If you were to take part of the carriageway and turn it into a dedicated bus route, you could massively increase the number of people travelling down this corridor into the city each day. So an extra 4,000 passengers. And all of that helps with the whole move, both towards improving air quality, because of course less journeys means less emissions being created on those journeys, but also that process of moving towards net zero.
And one of the ways we can do that is improve this cycle lane that runs along the side of the road, perhaps in the pavement space, or we could be even more radical and take up some of the carriageway by taking out perhaps a car sharing lane or part of it, putting in the cycleway.
What we also have here, the other part of the infrastructure here, is a rail corridor. Now the thing with this rail corridor is that it's a mainline route coming up from London, and what we have here is capacity for 4,000 people an hour on those trains, but of course 3,000 of those are being used by people coming from other locations into this city. So we have space for an additional 1,000 per hour.
But it does show the interface, doesn't it? You need the infrastructure changes, you need the policy changes and the behaviour changes, and somehow we've got to work them all together to actually get to a place where we can say, yeah, we've decarbonised the transport system, we've improved air quality, and people are still getting to where they want to go.
Yeah, so there's a really interesting case of that in Nottingham, where I live. What we have in Nottingham is a car parking levy, and basically what that has done has provided income which has been hypothecated to improve public transport, and a key part of the public transport infrastructure that's been improved in Nottingham is that there has been a sort of pretty extensive tram network developed.
And that's certainly an option for the inhabitants of this suburb to get in here, because it looks like we've got some spare rail capacity here. However, infrastructure like trams is not going to be achieved very rapidly, and it's certainly going to create disruption, and it may be that the tram has to cross a road or run along the road for some of its journey and disrupt or reduce the capacity of the road network under construction. But when it's complete, we can add our tram to the line here.
So what that does is take people off the roads and moves them onto that public transport network. Obviously there are routes to decarbonising those journeys, and the trams are a very obvious route, because the trams of course are electric, so we perhaps signify that by electrification. You can at a local level also put electric buses in place, and again, in Nottingham, that is something that's happening. We are seeing electric buses on a number of the routes now around Nottingham, bus routes around Nottingham. I think those are both sort of local policies that drive that use of electricity.
But you need the national policies sort of aligned with it, don't you? Because if you're going to encourage people to buy electric cars rather than internal combustion engine, then you need a national charging infrastructure, and as we have now, potentially an end date of when the internal combustion engine can be bought.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a range of policies that really incentivise people to switch to an electric vehicle. So from investing in charging infrastructure to subsidising vehicle purchase, and then also investing in electrification of the public transport fleet, and then also measures like clean air zones that basically constrain travel by dirtier vehicles and encourage uptake of clean vehicles.
Okay, so we've talked a bit about how we can change transport policies to solve perhaps some of the congestion issues or whatever, but I mean there's more than just congestion to be worried about, isn't there?
I mean, it's increasingly the case that transport planners are having to think about a wide range of objectives beyond just getting people from A to B and keeping the network operating. So we're increasingly focused on questions like health, air quality, and of course in particular the need to meet our net zero objectives, with transport being one of the biggest carbon emitters in our society.
They don't necessarily automatically deliver net zero because all of that electrification is very reliant on a low carbon supply of electricity, and whilst we are reducing the amount of greenhouse gases produced as we generate electricity, it isn't yet zero.
So there's a range of things that we can do in policy terms. We can do measures that reduce the need to travel, so avoid the need to travel. So for example, we can do interventions that combine land use and transport planning, things like 15-minute city concepts, restricting parking in new developments, or things like promoting different working patterns, promoting working from home, and basically reducing the need to travel on the network. We've got a set of slightly more radical measures that you can do. So for example, reducing the cost of travelling by sustainable modes, increasing access, so access to bikes, access to bike hire schemes, and then also measures that manage demand, so measures that reduce the appeal of travelling by car, such as a workplace parking levy, a congestion charge, parking controls, and all those sorts of measures that can really start to make it less appealing to travel by car and more appealing to travel by public transport.
Right, so what we're doing is effectively we're moving the car downwards.
Yes.
As well as moving the forms of transport that are going to be less environmentally an issue, higher up the preference scale.
Absolutely, we're taking demand off the network to reduce the pressure, we're making it more appealing to travel by sustainable modes, and then finally what we're doing with the fleet that remains on the road, both the public transport and the car fleet, we're investing in measures to clean up that fleet.
I mean, this isn't quick. Certainly the development of the trams in Nottingham hasn't been a quick process. Moving people onto bikes is not a quick process. I mean, you see a lot of bikes in London now. Yeah. When I was a student in London in the late 80s, you saw very few people cycling. It was seen as too dangerous. I think it was too dangerous at that time. And yet now you see significant numbers, but that's a very long process to go from one situation to the other.
Do you think we do this equitably?
I think it's always a challenge to do it equitably. In practice, we know that the people with the most choices are the people with more money. The people more likely to be travelling on modes that they're less happy with are the lower income people. So the more we can improve the experiences of those modes, the more equitable our system becomes.
And back to Ruby.
Thanks, Mike. That was great. Really good to see the game in action. I know, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I was maybe struggling to imagine how it would work until I saw that video, and I was suddenly kind of like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense. It's a really kind of powerful tool, I think, for kind of helping to bring together the maybe what I think some of us as transport planners maybe even take for granted, the kind of integration of the importance of modal shift and the levers to achieve that with actually decarbonising the fleet. And I think maybe we maybe we take that understanding for granted sometimes. So I think it's really, really powerful to kind of have it laid out like that. I'm going to introduce Claire to speak to us. Claire is oh, sorry, no. Am I going to do Claire or am I going to do Annette? I think we talked about Annette going next, actually. Sorry, Claire. You popped up on my screen and I suddenly was like, yes, it's Claire's turn. Sorry, Annette. Annette is a chartered transport planning professional. A few years ago, while failing to work out how the transport network of a small town was going to accommodate 20,000 new homes, she realised we needed to challenge our traditional transport planning approaches. Therefore, Annette is now Head of Futures at Mott MacDonald and a key advisor to the Department for Transport on their own Futures programme, embedding futures thinking into DFT policy to make decisions more resilient to future uncertainty, which is obviously very relevant to what we're talking about today. So, Annette, I'll pass over to you, please.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ruby. Hoping you can all see my slides. Is that okay? Are we there? Oh, it's not coming up yet, is it?
Just thinking about it.
Okay. Oh, a bit slow.
Oh, I think it says you're at the end of the slideshow, so you might need to click back.
Maybe that's why. I wonder why that is. Oh, hang on. Sorry, everybody. Let me just go there. Right. Try again. Share that. And this. Great. I think that should be there now. Is that right?
Yes. There we go.
Brilliant. Okay. So hi everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to have a run through of a few slides about delivering rapid and equitable transport decarbonisation. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, gosh, you could talk about this for ages, and I've only got 10 minutes. So I kind of identified 4 guiding principles that I think I've seen in action around the UK in particular, and I'm appreciative that these 4 guiding principles won't be the only ones, but I think for me they're the ones that I really kind of notice could really help to make a difference in terms of delivering rapid and equitable transport decarbonisation. So I'm going to run through with you these 4 guiding principles, and I don't think they're in any particular order, but I am going to run through creating a vision, changing our focus, collecting evidence and collaborating together, just to kind of talk through these different aspects and where I've seen them happening across the country in different places. So creating a vision, I think this for us in terms of delivering rapid and equitable transport is really important, but I think that we can get particularly concerned about creating a vision because it is difficult sometimes to get a consensus across a range of different kind of stakeholders and people that we work with. But I've highlighted here 2 visions that I've worked with South East Scotland Regional Transport Partnership. And what I like about them is that they give a direction and they give a kind of a point at which that area wants to get to. So you can see there that first vision around a regional transport system that provides all citizens with a genuine choice of transport which fulfills their needs and provides travel opportunities for work and leisure on a sustainable basis. It kind of covers off what we're talking about today in terms of equitable and transport decarbonisation, and it gives a direction of travel for when those decision makers are really thinking about the next steps and the interventions that need to be taken. And then there's a further vision there, which is also from Sestran, which is by 2030, a region-wide mass platform will provide an easy to use and attractive alternative to car ownership that has led to reduced transport poverty across the region. And I just really like these two visions, because one of them is about the regional transport system, and it talks about equitable, and it talks about decarbonisation, but also it's got a kind of a second vision that nests within it about the mass platform, and it gives an area who are working and focusing on this type of important objective. A vision really just helps to guide those decision makers to help them realize where they need to be heading. And I really like it when a vision is maybe within grasp. So by 2030 gives us much more urgency, say, than by 2050. So I think that's also really helpful to think about. So that's my first principle. My second principle around delivering rapid and equitable transport decarbonisation is to change our focus. We have often worked as transport planners, inevitably in the transport system, thinking about physical mobility. But it's important for us to recognise that actually transport enables us to access things, and there are also other ways for us to access the things that we need to. So this is why I think the triple access system is really important. It recognises that we can access things through physical mobility, spatial proximity, but also digital connectivity. And so changing our focus when we're developing plans and strategies for areas enables us to reach out to other people. I think we are really good as transport professionals at collaboration and engaging with each other and with other stakeholders. And I think we need to broaden out as well across other sectors. So it's interesting having heard today about Heretics and their links into the energy system. We also need to be thinking about the land use system and the digital connectivity system as well. And I think this changing the focus particularly does help around ensuring that we achieve an equitable future, but also a decarbonised future. I think being able to access things we need to through spatial proximity and digital connectivity supports people who maybe don't have access to the car, might not be able to afford to travel on public transport, but it means that they can access things through spatial proximity, or they might be able to access things through digital connectivity. So it enables a levelling up around accessibility to happen. So thinking about changing our focus around the triple access system, I think will really help us in terms of delivering rapid and equitable transport decarbonisation. So my third principle is around collecting evidence, and I think that was interesting when we were talking earlier about what is a challenge around transport decarbonisation, and one of the points was making sure that we can see that things are working. So this is some work that I did with Transport for West Midlands, where we took the triple access system and we actually mapped it. So you can see here we developed 4 maps. One of the two maps at the top are identifying amenities that are within walking, and also the second map is within cycling distance of homes, around a kind of a 15-minute round trip. So that's a kind of like 15-minute neighbourhood kind of mapping. In the bottom left-hand corner, we've got ability to access different kind of more major perhaps land uses like a hospital or work, and whether people can access that within 45 minutes of a public transport journey. And then that third map there at the bottom in the right hand corner is about the use of the internet and how people can access and use the internet. So we've got 4 separate maps there that really help to evidence where there is good accessibility, but also where there's poor accessibility right now. And I think it's really important for us to recognise that our system is already inequitable, and we need to start acting now in order to achieve an equitable and a decarbonised transport system. So you can see on the right hand side where we've actually combined all those maps, and you can see the kind of it's like a heat map really. Where there's good accessibility, that's the orange spaces, and where there's kind of poor areas of accessibility, those are the blue kind of places on the map. So it already starts to demonstrate and helps TfWM to kind of prioritise where they need to be focusing in terms of investment. But what we also did, and this kind of does bring in the kind of very much the transport decarbonisation layer, is we took that triple access planning map and we also identified CO2 emissions per person by car by location. And so we've then got a map here in terms of collecting evidence, which clearly shows where we've got good access, and that's across the digital, spatial, and physical mobility. So we've got good access in the green areas for people to be able to move and access different amenities by different means. But the red are the areas, and the red and the pink are the areas of poor access. And what's really interesting, I think, about this map is that when we showed it to decision makers and politicians, they really recognized that those like pink areas are areas of low accessibility and low carbon, meaning low car use. And they're kind of isolated areas. We kind of called these areas where there's amenity deserts. There's no opportunity for good spatial proximity. And it kind of highlights where, as a transport profession and as professionals in general, we need to be reaching out and working together to achieve that equitable system. And really the light green areas are the cities across the West Midlands where people have got good access and they're also choosing to travel sustainably. And what we want to be able to see in the future is kind of more of this map going pale green. But it demonstrates really where there is definite inequity across the West Midlands, and where we can kind of prioritise and focus to ensure that we reduce that level of inequity. And so my fourth principle is around the importance of collaborating together. And this really speaks to the need that we were speaking about earlier about achieving buy-in. This is some work that we did in Bristol, and we actually were able to take some Bristol citizens through an approach where we asked them what they wanted the future of Bristol's transport system to look like. And we got some really, really interesting insights. And I think when we speak to members of the public and find ways of engaging members of the public, it really helps us to embed what we're trying to achieve, and will hopefully make the interventions that we put in place more successful. So we spoke to the citizens of Bristol about a vision for the future, but we also talked to them about scenario planning, and they were really able to get their heads around that. And we talked to them about the triple access system, and we simplified it by talking about things that they have on their doorstep, places they can get to by transport, and things they can access on the internet. And I thought what was really interesting about this is that we got very deep into conversations and localized issues. And we spoke to one gentleman who we asked him what he wanted the future of Bristol's transport system to look like. And he said, I just want it not to make me lonely. And he started to identify that perhaps, we asked him what it would be like when he in 2050. And he said, do you think those connected autonomous vehicle things that you talk about in your in the industry, that might help to kind of open up my neighborhood, because we don't have very good public transport services. And so it got into the real deep and kind of like excellent kind of examples of the public thinking about solutions. Again, I would say, just mention in terms of collaborating, I think this goes back again to the triple access planning, is to make sure that we're engaging across a broad range of stakeholders. So this is some work done in Cheshire West and Chester for their LTP4, where they've taken the Transport for North future travel scenarios, and they have taken those and tried to understand what do those scenarios mean for people living in Cheshire West and Chester. And I think what has really shone a light for Cheshire West and Chester is that whilst some of those scenarios, the TFN scenarios, are really some of them are quite positive, what they identified was that those scenarios were at the expense of rural areas. And as Cheshire West and Chester is a rural, quite predominantly rural, they really need to be on the front foot in terms of making sure they're planning for an equitable and decarbonised future. They also recognised from these scenarios the kind of the potential decline of public transport, and perhaps therefore the need to really accelerate the adoption of demand responsive transport. And the other thing that came out of this workshop, which was across the council with people from regeneration, people from sport and education and things like that, is that they identified that if there was an increase in technology across the borough, then perhaps that would lead to more social exclusion. And we'd therefore go in the reverse direction. So what might be needed in terms of training and things like that, which might feel beyond and outside of our transport kind of expertise, but actually, you know, linking up and collaborating more widely across different sectors will help us to achieve, I think, this decarbonised and equitable future that we're wanting to achieve. I'm going to stop there, but if you do want any more information on any of that I've talked about, then I've got a set of resources there that I can share these slides afterwards, and you could look into this in more detail.
Thanks, Annette. That was fascinating and great to kind of have it grounded in some really good examples as well of that kind of being used in practice. And actually something that came to mind with the kind of triple access stuff, and particularly that mapping, kind of overlaying the mapping for TFWM, was something Claire said in the video, which I wrote down, which was that people with more choices are the people with more money. And I think that's kind of what comes out of that access thing, is that you might have access to kind of one aspect of that triangle, but that doesn't mean that you've really got that choice.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much. There's no specific questions in the chat for you, so I think I'm going to move on to Claire, and then we'll kind of bring you back in towards the end, if that's okay. So thanks, Annette. So Claire Sheffield, you've already had a little bit of an introduction to her kind of as one of the members of Heuristic, but Claire is also a director of, or the director of transport planning at Arup, and has got more than 20 years experience in strategic planning and analysis. She's actually a researcher by background, specializing in understanding travel behavior, how to manage demand and deliver mode shift, obviously, and has worked on several major road pricing schemes. So Claire's going to speak to us today on kind of TP Day theme as well. Take it away, Claire. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much, Ruby, and thanks, Annette. That was so interesting, and I would definitely endorse your four-pronged approach there. I really liked your mapping stuff. That was very cool. And I'm very relieved that we've also taken a different approach to answering this question, which was fortuitous. So, oh, my slides are moving very slowly. Okay. So I've thought about it from the point of view of what we kind of need to do as an industry in terms of the outcome of our actions. So actually that dovetails really nicely with what Annette was talking about, which is kind of more about the how we might deliver this. So I've looked at kind of how we need to adopt a system-wide multimodal approach that leads to net zero emission transport options for all. We've developed this 6-step approach at Arup. Because this is an absolutely massive topic, I'm just going to focus today on the top 2, which is very much my area of expertise, around how we enable greener choices and how we invest in sustainable transport. And that actually will also, to some extent, answer the question around how we manage the climate transition risks, because the topic of this seminar is about rapid and equitable delivery. And those are 2 of the key risks around climate transition, either that it's too slow or that it is done at pace, but that it is not done fairly and that people are left behind or damaged as a result of the actions that we take to manage to deliver net zero. There is a sort of inevitable conflict between rapidity and equity, which we are going to have to tackle. So fundamentally, to deliver this behaviour change, we need to use integrated transport and land use planning to reduce the need to travel. We need to, but while we're doing that, we need to be able to maintain that kind of economic vibrancy, the community and the social interaction. That's what was being talked about in the previous talk, about the fact that there's actually a risk that some of the measures that we do that can perhaps reduce the need to travel, but also increase isolation within our communities. And it's incredibly important that we deliver this in a way that avoids that. Secondly, we need to encourage mode shift from private car to more sustainable modes. We all know this stuff. And thirdly, we need to clean up the remaining car fleet so that it's lower emission. So that's all kind of sounds okay, but how do you actually do it? I've gone right back. I've sort of done a bit of a greatest hits career-wise of the things that have made the most kind of impact on me in terms of forming my thinking around this topic. And one of the really, really key moments in my career, and I think in the UK for transport planning kind of exploration, was London 2012 Games. It was a huge opportunity to test out the impact of travel behaviour policy initiatives at scale. That's since been replicated for other events such as the recent Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. But London was the kind of first really big hitter opportunity to do that. And we found some really fascinating things as a result of that, which are highly relevant to the net zero question now. Firstly, we found that rather than people completely transforming their travel, that the reduction in travel on the network was delivered by lots of people making a small change, and that this required mass engagement and scale. And this really reflects what we were talking about earlier, that we need to take the public with us. They need to believe that this activity is necessary and that it will work, that it will be impactful. In the Games, the message was plausible. People believed the consequences of not changing were worse than the inconvenience of making a change. And we need people to believe that for the changes that they will have to make to deliver net zero. If they don't think that it's necessary or that it will be impactful, they won't change. And then crucially, we found that the change was only sustained after the fact, where a better option was revealed. So the most frequent travellers were already aware of the options available to them and satisfied with their choice. So much of the change that emerged was just simply part of the kind of normal churn. So this is really challenging because, again, as people were raising earlier, particularly around rural communities, at the moment, for many people, for much of the time, the car is the best option. It's quick, it's convenient, it's cost effective, it's safe and comfortable. I live in rural Nottinghamshire. Realistically, for most of the journeys that I make, the car is my only choice, and where I do have another choice, it's still quite often my best choice. So, and we also know that when this is true most of the time, that people get used to their cars and use them as a default all of the time. We know that car dependency increases with age as households grow, and in particular with the purchase of the second car. And having a car is a strong social norm. And one of the things that we really have to understand as transport planners is that for many people in our communities, it's seen as part of being a responsible adult because of the way it helps you to be responsible within your community, helping others, taking responsibility for yourself. And so convincing people that reducing their car travel is the right and responsible thing to do goes against some of the quite integral things that people believe about themselves and about their car use. And it requires a major change in amongst younger people. So in the British Social Attitude Survey, about a decade ago, we found that about 4 in 10 people thought that they needed to reduce their car travel in response to climate change. That doesn't mean they're doing it, but it at least means that they're on board with the idea. But I still think we've got a long way to go in persuading people. So we need to persuade people. Car is currently the best option for many people. In practice, car ownership is strongly correlated with access to public transport. So people living in places with the best transport alternatives are less likely to own a car, even at high income levels. We see this across major city centres in the UK. It's most striking in London by far, where you get a really quite reasonable number of people on very high incomes choosing to live without a car. But elsewhere, car ownership is primarily correlated with income, so that people without a car are living like that because they can't afford a car rather than through choice. So the lack of car is an inequity, and anything that we do around climate change needs to consider that. We also see that around the mode choice. So as I said in the video, excuse me, sorry, I'm a bit croaky today. As I said in the video, we have the challenge that the people who've got the most choice about what mode they take are the people on the higher incomes, and they are able to take the modes that are faster, that are more direct. And so fundamentally, the most equitable way of delivering net zero is improving those alternatives to the car, because if we improve those alternatives to the car, they are already being used by lower income people. They facilitate people to move away from the car and save money, and they make that a better choice. So I've put together a sort of 5-point manifesto of what I think we need to do as transport planners to deliver a rapid and equitable transition to net zero. The first one is quite aligned with one of the things that Annette was talking about, setting strategic goals that drive meaningful change in the transport alternative. Then I've moved on to what we need to do with the network, making the most of the network we already have, focusing on those modes where change can happen quickly, then facilitating the transition to electric for the remaining car fleet, and finally being brave and recognising that demand management will play a vital role in the transition to net zero. So I'm just going to quickly run through those. So firstly, we need to set strategic goals that drive change, that are really specific and allow us to prioritise spend and make choices. What we've seen is that numerous local authorities across the country have declared a climate emergency or have goals, but we need to turn those into really specific goals that enable us to make choices. What mode share do you need to deliver net zero? What level of public transport accessibility do different people in different type of places need? If we can set those things out, we can actually use them to drive the choices that we're making. And then our processes need to help rather than hinder us. We need to be able to make program level business cases that show how interventions support the delivery of these strategic goals, and that enable us to make the case for measures that might otherwise struggle to make it through our business case process. Secondly, we need to make the most of the network that we have. If we're going to reduce car dominance, we need to provide credible alternatives to the car. We shouldn't treat demand as a passive forecast, but we should think about what demand we want to see and how we could achieve it. So, for example, we know that delivering new rail infrastructure is very difficult to achieve rapidly. As we show in the transport planner game, it takes a long time and it involves a lot of disruption. And we know that rail tends to be used by higher income people, and so investment in rail does not always increase equity. But right now, we currently have spare capacity on our railway network. Post-pandemic, the demand has not returned to pre-pandemic levels, although it has returned on our roads, which is pretty bad news for sustainable travel goals. So instead of taking a passive approach to demand, we should be using, looking at current demand and using it to justify cuts to rail services. We should be thinking holistically about what policy interventions we could put in place to make the most of the capacity that we have, and specifically to drive mode shift from car to rail. Who could be travelling by rail who isn't already? That means thinking about fares, about onward travel, about information and accessibility. So it's really about making the most of the network that we've got. I've used rail as an example here. It's not just rail, it's the whole public transport network. Thirdly, we need to focus on improving those modes where change can happen quickly. This particularly means bus, perhaps some mass transit. We're doing some very interesting work in Brisbane, looking at trackless tram. I know there's trackless tram innovation happening here in the UK as well. We're seeing major innovation happening around bus franchising in Greater Manchester, and other cities are following. The ability to offer a planned network, offering frequent services that go where people need to go, fast and reliable journeys, integrated and affordable fares, a high quality experience, clean, accessible buses, good information. All of this could be transformative and can be delivered within a 10-year time horizon. And finally, one of the things, this network doesn't actually show up very well, which is a shame, but I thought we always include a public transport network in these, and this is actually a cycle network that we developed for Transport Scotland. Finally, cycling in particular and active travel in general is another thing that can be delivered fast, and that can really offer a cheap and healthy alternative to the car. Not just in our urban areas, also in our rural areas as well, where buses may not be that viable. A creative approach to cycling could be really innovative there. Fourthly, we need to facilitate the transition to electric for the remaining car fleet. This is about reinforcing local power distribution systems to facilitate the shift to electric. At the moment, we have this really perverse system whereby it's kind of first come, first served. And if you're unlucky enough to be the one who tips over the grid capacity, then you face enormous costs for that upgrade. That is delaying upgrades in certain places and constraining the choices that we can make. Secondly, developing equitable charging solutions, particularly for those 30% of households who don't have off-street parking. If we can't provide a solution that works for everybody, then the ambitions around transition to electric are just not going to be viable. And so that's thinking about people in those sort of inner city, high density areas, often on lower incomes, and helping them to upgrade. And then thirdly, helping to ensure the upgrade to electric is affordable to everyone. A huge issue right now is that you can save money by having an electric car, but only if you have the access to savings or to affordable credit that allows you to invest to save. At the moment, we've got support in place to make an electric car cheaper, but what we could really do in future is target that support to really get people over that hump, to allow them to invest to save for the sorts of people who wouldn't be able to do so otherwise, and move away from the current trend where electric cars are basically a higher income luxury. And finally, be brave. We need to recognise that demand management will play a vital role in the transition to net zero. This is from a piece of analysis done in London in the 2010s, but that looked at the period of 2010, which was a period where we achieved massive mode shift, a 15% reduction in travel by car, despite a growing population and economy. That's the sort of change that we need to be seeing over the next decade to deliver net zero. And what that analysis showed was that it was a vital combination, both of massive improvements to the public transport network, both in terms of the services and reductions in costs, but also constraints on the highway network, decreasing highway capacity, decreasing parking availability, and making travel by car more expensively, obviously with the kind of headline introduction of the congestion charge, but lots of other measures behind the scenes. Only through an integrated carrot and stick approach are we going to deliver this. But these schemes are unbelievably hard to deliver. So far, demand management schemes have been successfully introduced in city centres where public transport access is better, or at a point where most people or vehicles were already unlikely to need to pay the charge. So, for example, when the congestion charge went in 2003, only 14% of journeys into central London were by car. With the Outer London ULEZ, despite all of the press that there's been about it, even at implementation, only 85% of vehicles were already compliant. So at the moment, schemes are going in places where already a lot of the work has been done. Other schemes that have gone in is targeting freight or commercial vehicles rather than the private car. So we need to think about how we deliver these schemes successfully. There are so many schemes that have failed or not proceeded in this space, but fundamentally, this is where taking the public on this journey will be vital, because demand management is going to be part of the solution. So that's it. It's 5 things that we need to do. They're all quite hard, but I think that we can achieve it, especially if we take the 4-step approach discussed earlier.
Thank you, Claire. That was quite kind of inspiring, I think. I think difficult, as you say. It's not easy to follow through with all of those points that you're raising, but I think it makes it feel like at least there is a kind of a way forward, I suppose, when sometimes maybe it feels like there isn't. I actually was just going to abuse my position as chair to ask a question that I had about your be brave point. Just kind of looping back round to the point at the very beginning with the Slido and the kind of requirement for public pressure. I suppose that demand management thing, is it contradictory to expect the public to put pressure on politicians to implement demand management on the public, on themselves?
I think it's ambitious. I think we have seen examples where you do get a certain level of public pressure to do something. In the early 2000s in London, you had this kind of extraordinary unholy alliance between Ken Livingstone, one of the most left-wing, obviously known as Red Ken, very left-wing mayor, and the big business community in the City of London, who both were basically saying, we have to introduce this scheme because central London is not functioning, it's grinding to a halt, it's damaging our economy. And because not that many people in practice were actually going to pay the charge, and because the money was going to go to improvements and people could see those improvements, literally on the day that it launched, loads of new buses launched onto the network on that same day. It's very sensible. So, you know, that kind of, you can create a coalition of support. Obviously, there was a huge amount of pushback. There was a legal challenge. You know, I don't want to retell that story as though it was easy. Similarly, in London, although obviously there's been a lot of press about the Outer London ULEZ, in practice, the Inner London ULEZ, which affects 3 million people, went in with surprisingly little comment or criticism at all. And in fact, there is still majority public support for the ULEZ in London. And that is because there is a burning platform around air quality, which Londoners have bought into, or a lot of Londoners have bought into. So it's not impossible, but both of those examples are London. Now, clean air zones have been introduced in other city centres across the country with success. They have gone in. So it's not impossible elsewhere either. But it's certainly very difficult, and I think we have to be very realistic that people have to believe that there is an alternative, that it's fair before you start penalising them. So we have to have a really clear trajectory to do that, so that at the point at which you do that demand management, people are saying, yeah, okay, because I could do this, but I'm just kind of choosing not to. Sorry, that was a bit waffly. That's my view. No. It's a pretty complicated question.
It is a complicated question. No, it is definitely a complicated question. I think I'm just kind of having a look through the questions that have come through. Annette, from Vanessa Urschel, I really appreciated your maps for the spatial distribution of equity and carbon contributions. How much engagement of politicians have you had? Have we seen a change in the narrative of those engaged in that way?
So those maps were created for Transport for West Midlands LTP5, and to kind of start to build the narrative towards what will be contained within the local transport plan for the West Midlands. So they're really beginning to tell the story of where there needs to be investment and what type of investment is needed. So the hope is that they will provide that background and enable those kind of perhaps more challenging kind of be brave type measures that Claire's talking about, to justify where those would go in. And so one of the ideas, thoughts that was had was, in relation to perhaps if you could start telling some good news stories around those areas that are maybe mid-green or light green on the map that have good accessibility already, and you're then beginning to kind of put in kind of measures around maybe low traffic neighborhoods and things like that to further embed the behaviors in that area. Then when you can see other areas of light green and dark green across the West Midlands, perhaps that particular intervention might be transferable. And so those types of using those maps in those ways is what we've started to do, to start to explain to politicians why certain measures are in the are going to be in the LTP, or what we're recommending.
Fantastic. And a question from Katrina for Mike, Andy, and Claire. Have you used the heuristic model with the public at all as an engagement tool to bring them along on the journey for the need for demand management measures and the reallocation of road space? I wanted to ask you this as well.
I think the answer to that question is we would love to. That's exactly that's one of the places we would like to go with it. But we haven't as yet, because we haven't managed to sort of get the right relationship to make that happen, because obviously it needs someone to sort of say, we've got an engagement needed with the public and we'll come to you and work with you to do it. The one thing we have done is we do quite a lot of work with different MSc courses and centres for doctoral training who aren't in the transport sector, but they do take this workshop and use it with their students, because what they find is that because people sort of get transport it's a great tool for just getting a conversation going around an area where they need to understand that policy makes a difference. And we found it a really useful tool for that. Plus, they enjoy doing it. But it's a really great way of getting people to engage with the need for policy and the need for policy changes and the impact it has. Claire, do you want to say anything more on that?
I was just going to say that also when we were developing the game, we tried it out with our friends and family, and we had to extend our room booking because we couldn't get them out of the room because they wanted to keep playing it. So I think it would work really well with the public because it's because it's quite fun to do. But I think it's the point that Mike made that everybody kind of understands transport because it's something that we all do. So it's a topic that really resonates with people, and turning something into a game also takes a lot of the, obviously, I'm sure lots of us on this call have done stakeholder engagement events, and it's obviously people often come in with a very specific thing they want to say, a very specific view, but because the game kind of neutralizes that, it's a good way of actually just generating a wider discussion.
It almost depoliticizes it slightly.
Yeah,
maybe. Yeah,
exactly.
Every time we've run it, that's always been our reflection coming out, is wasn't that great in terms of the conversations we created, and we've actually changed the way we do it over time, because we started off by having sort of presentations, because that's the way we do some of our other workshops. We do a presentation, then we play it out in the game and do a present. What we do now is we raise an issue, play it out in the game, and then have a conversation, because that's what it creates. It's that ability for people to have a conversation about the issues that have occurred, and we develop things and take things forward and try out new ideas.
Yeah, and I think maybe the most, at least in my mind, the thing that I feel that we really struggle with to get across in that kind of stakeholder and community engagement is the trade-off element, and kind of we can't just make everything amazing for everybody, including cars. It's got there's always some kind of trade-off for somebody somewhere. A really interesting question for all of you, I think. So Vanessa's question is, how do we ensure that EV infrastructure doesn't impede or endanger movements of walking and wheeling users? But I was wondering if we could broaden that to include, how do we ensure that the growth of EVs is done in an equitable way, kind of financially as well, maybe? I don't know if anyone wants to put their hand up and go for that one first.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I think that is a big issue. I'm doing a project looking at that right now. I think it is a big issue because at the moment what we're seeing obviously is there's not a high volume of second-hand vehicles in the EV market, and it will take quite a long time for those to come through. And so, EVs are limited to people who can buy a new car, which is very much a subgroup of the population. Most people buy a second-hand car. They're more expensive for the same size of vehicle, and ultimately they will save you money, but you have to invest to save. And of course, if you don't have low cost credit, then they might not save you money if you're paying an awful lot for that borrowing. So, and of course, we've also seen an increase in our household energy bills, which means that this sort of message that switch from petrol to putting it on your household energy bill suddenly doesn't feel quite so appealing as something that you're going to save money on, even if the numbers do still add up. I do think it's about I think we need a much more strategic approach to the charging infrastructure. At the moment, it feels very piecemeal. I know there's a lot of issues with funding that has been allocated not necessarily being spent, and I think we need to be focusing right now on the hard to reach. At the moment, you get these graphs like that of EV uptake, and so it's easy to be really lazy, but we need to be looking at, it's going to plateau when all that easy stuff's been done, and we need to be looking at how we get those people in. That is about, how do you get access to charging infrastructure in homes where it's more difficult, but also in ways that doesn't just drag it across the pavement? How do you provide low-cost public charging, which at the moment is often high cost? How do you consolidate that public charging? You quite often have to have an app at the moment to charge your car. That's not very accessible. and providing more targeted support for EV upgrade. I think all of those things are vital, and right now I don't think we're seeing many of them happen.
Yeah, I think the example, the topic of this discussion is around, achieving an equitable, and decarbonised transport future. And at the moment, we aren't equitable around EVs at all. And so we need to be really mindful of that. I think recognising that it wouldn't it be brilliant to have a just transition, but actually we're not just now. So let's get that straight and open our eyes to that. And when again looking at those maps, because they're quite useful, but that the pale pink on those maps are typically areas of that people are isolated, they have limited choices, but also they live in areas where it's not going to be easy for them to charge an EV. And so all these kind of factors, we need to just be very, very mindful of the unintended consequences of pushing some of these policies.
Yeah, and I'd extend that to thinking about the broader system as well. I mean, there's, I think, well, Claire touched on it in her presentation, the impact of EV charging on the electricity system and the issues around equity in there as well, and how you ensure that infrastructure gets developed and deployed in terms of the network that supports that charging, and how that's done without that cost being loaded onto people in fuel poverty. And I think there's, we haven't talked a lot about poverty today, but there's issues of transport poverty, there's issues of fuel poverty. We've seen those writ large over the last couple of years, and it's how do you get all of that to happen without those issues occurring. I guess, like Annette, though, I am cautious of that term just transition. I was involved in running a project called Delivering Net Zero over the last couple of years, where we consulted a whole bunch of stakeholders around how do we take forward, how do we move towards net zero. And one of the contested issues in that conversation, there was lots of things everyone agreed about. There were two camps, one who wanted to move very radically, very quickly, others who said, let's do something that's evolutionary. But there was one issue that stood out that no one agreed about, which was just transitions. And it wasn't because they didn't all say we need a just transition. It was because they all had a very, very different definition of what just transition meant. And that's, I think, one of the big challenges we've got, is that we all want this equitable future, but we actually all mean something different when we talk about it. And I think there's a big challenge in there for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And something maybe we don't appreciate enough, that kind of, maybe we just take it for granted that we all agree what equity would mean, but actually maybe that's not as simple as that. But I suppose in the kind of in being as rapid about it as possible, maybe we also don't have the luxury of time to sit around debating the meaning of equitable if we need to just get things done as quickly as possible. There was a question from Anjali Turner, who I was actually wondering if Andy might come into this discussion as well, as a bit more of an expert on kind of energy around offsetting and the role of that in kind of transitioning to net zero, specifically in terms of transport decarbonisation. But we don't really, or at least our conversations that I'm in around a decarbonised transport system don't usually include conversations around offsetting. So I think that's a really interesting question.
Yeah, I spotted that question and thought, offsetting is, I think there's huge dangers with offsetting. I remember back in the day when we had a national target of 60% decarbonisation, and then it went to 80%. Everybody sat back because they thought, that's fine, my little bit of industry will be in the remaining 20%, so I don't have to do anything. I think now we've got a target of net zero, we all realise we've got to do something. We've all got to clean up our act. Except that there's this offsetting thing which might just save the day. So I'm sure there are still actually quite a few industries think it's okay because at the end of the day we can offset, so we don't actually have to do much. We don't have to get to zero. Personally, I don't think there'll be enough offsets to satisfy the demand of everybody who thinks that they can use an offset to finish a job. And also the quality of the offsetting we've seen has been, I think, pretty poor. I think a lot of the schemes that you've seen in place have been perhaps, well, phantom schemes might be a bit disingenuous, but certainly not ones delivering the CO2 reductions that are claimed. And yet these sort of offsets are floating around. You can jump on a plane, can't you, and pay a little bit extra and buy some carbon offsets. And the fact that it's only a little bit extra tends to imply actually it's perhaps not a real scheme, because reducing CO2 costs a lot of money, whether it be real reductions or offsetting. So I think at the end of the day, there will be some offsetting. If we're going to get to net zero, I think there'll have to be. But there's a real danger of promoting it and having it there at this stage in the conversation, when we're only just started the decarbonisation process, is that everybody will sit back and say, it's okay, I can just buy a few offsets at the end of the day. I don't think they'll exist, and I think the ones that exist will be probably poor quality and not really producing the reductions we think they are.
Thanks, Andy. I think a lot of that comes down to a lot of the similar things around decarbonising energy sources for things like EVs as well, where it's, if we're not actually using clean energy to power electric vehicles, obviously we're still having an improvement for air quality, but in terms of decarbonisation, we're not actually really achieving any of our goals. So I guess in some ways it's quite a similar kind of conversation.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else on the panel wanted to weigh in on that offsetting topic. Otherwise, I might pick another question for Claire. Sorry, Claire. But I think it was you that was talking about the Olympics in London, and so what's the name of this person? TFW Marco Polo, which I think is probably not their real name. Asks, is there any information on the behaviour change from the Birmingham Commonwealth Games that you're aware of?
Yeah, I have been desperately messaging behind the scenes to try and find out the answer to that. I don't know, I have to say, but I do have colleagues who worked on that, so I am trying to find out, and if I do, I will either put it in the chat if it appears, or I will message you afterwards to share it.
I'll do similar, Claire, as well. I've been doing the same. But yeah, if you can find it. I think there was one thing about the Commonwealth Games. What was lovely about it is that it actually brought together so many different people across transport, and everyone worked together on it. So similar to the London Olympics. So yeah, that was also a nice thing about it. Broke down a lot of barriers between different organisations, didn't it? Yeah,
those projects are so great for that.
And they're great for just showing what's possible in a short space of time with enough concerted effort, you know, and the kind of political will behind it. Another
Power
one.
of a deadline.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone watching, I guess, as well is part of it. Claire, I don't know if you saw Alan Muir's question about the network in London. It's quite a specific question, so I'm not sure if you want to. I'm not sure if there's an easy answer to that question.
So it was a 63% of people reduced their travel, so the network impact was not as substantial as that, but we weren't aiming for such a substantial impact, because all we needed to do was free up the capacity so that all the visitors and so on could travel around on the network. So basically what we saw is that around 2/3 of people made some sort of change to their travel during that period, and in total that added up to enough change. Alan's absolutely right that obviously some of the changes that you're trying to promote for that specific activity don't particularly bring a carbon benefit, and also are not necessarily the sort of changes, you know, you're not usually trying to go to your bus users, get off the bus, actually just stay at home. It's not our kind of common message. So I think the message around the Olympics is not necessarily about the specific change that we generated, but it's more about what you can learn for delivering change on a mass scale. And kind of, I mean, what we were really interested in at TfL was what happened afterwards. You know, obviously we were very interested in successfully delivering the games, but we were also really interested in, like, did people stick with it? And the really key point was that basically most of the time Londoners were so expert on their travel options that they kind of already knew if there was a good option there already. The real different one was around working from home, and I think that was because the Olympics was like an early precursor to the obviously much more significant change that happened in the pandemic, where you have a trend that's happening anyway, and then you have some sort of disruption that then absolutely shoves that trend forwards. And so we saw that with the Olympics, particularly in the City of London, kind of pushing it, and then obviously the pandemic just blew it out of the water in terms of the level of change you can deliver.
No, yeah, well, yeah, exactly. We have had a pretty amazing few years in terms of kind of demonstrating what is possible.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've reached our kind of 5-2 cutoff. So I was just going to kind of wrap up the session by thanking you all for being here, participants and panel members. Everyone that's attended, so the recording of the session will be hosted on our website, and with the agreement of our speakers, we can circulate some slides and things as well, and make sure we get that kind of sent around to everybody. I was gonna maybe ask each of you to give me your kind of top, in kind of 1 or 2 sentences, what is your kind of call to action on how we plan and deliver for a rapid and equitable transition to a decarbonised transport system before we say goodbye. I don't know if anyone wants to volunteer to go first, otherwise I'm going to come to you in the order that you spoke during the session. But really just a couple of sentences.
Yeah, I think what I was struck by was, Claire's be brave. And I think we need to remember that some of the things that we need to do to rapidly decarbonise are not like the biggest things in the world. We don't need to invest tons and tons and tons of money. Some of the small changes we can make are really significant. So think about the small, be brave, definitely. But in that, think about the small changes that we need to make. Challenge people to reduce their car travel by 20%. They don't have to give up their car. Be my, let's be brave around those kind of statements.
Fantastic, thank you. Claire, you look like you're ready to go.
Oh God, right. I thought you were going to make me laugh.
Oh no, sorry.
no, it's fine. I can go. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think, yeah, probably around to follow on from that, reiterating the point of we should really take the step back and be really pragmatic about what we've got and what we can deliver quickly, and not be hampered by our current structures or kind of norms about how we do things. But if we stepped back and went, how should we use this network in the best way to decarbonise, we could actually deliver a lot with what's there already.
Fantastic. And then Mike.
Yeah, for me it's about it's agreed with both the comments from Annette and Claire, but on top of that, for me it's about decision makers. It's about providing evidence to decision makers that help them to make the decisions we need them to make, because we need to get on with this. And there isn't any right answers here. We need them to make those decisions so we can get on and start delivering. And then as a community, and particularly I spend quite a lot of my time working with researchers, there I think is that ability to provide the evidence of the impact of those decisions, because there will be unintended consequences, we know that, but actually be able to provide the evidence of where those are occurring, but also the evidence of where things are going well, and ensuring that gets promoted and pushed out, and that those lessons are learned and shared, and that we also work to provide solutions to the problems that will undoubtedly occur. I think that's the challenge. It's getting the decision makers to make a move and then helping them deal with the consequences of their decisions.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Andy, sorry,
Yeah,
I was going to come to you next.
I'm going to pick up on the rapid, because that's the thing that concerns me. If we're going to completely decarbonise in the next 26 years that we've got left, I don't see things progressing as rapidly as I need to. So I think we need to identify what are the bottlenecks, what's going to be the slowest step in the process. And it might be around behaviour change. It might be around the transport infrastructure itself, or it might be upstream, from the energy industry. Is it actually delivering the energy we need to to decarbonise the system, and then focusing on those bottlenecks so that they don't surprise us in 2049 that we realise we can't do it.
Fantastic. Well, we've got all the answers then, so we'll just all go away now and get on with it, I suppose. Thank you again so much for all of your time today, everyone that's dialed in, and all of our fantastic panelists. We're very grateful, and hopefully we'll see some of you at Transport Planning Day next week. So thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.